Do you have a child with autism or a toddler showing signs and you're wondering when and how to teach manners? I'm Dr. Mary Barbera, and today I'm covering that very topic. When, how early, when we should be teaching manners, and how to teach things like please, thank you, excuse me. We're covering it all. And I'm also covering the 3 mistakes both parents and professionals make when teaching manners. I made them all. I want to prevent you from making these same errors. So let's get to this really great episode, the 3 mistakes when teaching manners. You're listening to the Turn Autism Around podcast, episode number 98. I'm your host, Dr. Mary Barbera, and today I am doing another solo show covering the 3 mistakes parents and professionals make when teaching manners to children with autism or signs of autism. And I've made all of these mistakes, so I'm going to tell you about them and tell you how to teach manners, including excuse me and thank you. Before we jump into the episode, I am going to give a listener shout out to Melinda May, who gave a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcast. She said, I listened to your podcast since you started, completed your online courses, and bought your book. This is such important information that Dr. Klin is doing, and as a professional, I have been utilizing this within my practice, and I'm so glad you're extending this out to your audience. So much can be done if we work together and share with each other along the way. Excited to see what's to come. So if you are like Melinda, thank you so much for chiming in there and giving a 5-star rating review. It really does help me get the word out. And if you are like Melinda and you've listened to podcasts and you've loved them, I would love it if you, wherever you're listening, especially Apple Podcasts, if you would leave a great rating and review like Melinda did. It really does help with my dissemination. Okay, so right now let's get into the 3 mistakes parents and professionals make when teaching manners. Welcome back to another episode of Turn Autism Around. Let's dive into those 3 mistakes parents and professionals make. So like I said, made all of these mistakes. And early on, we were so eager to teach my son Lucas manners that we ended up inadvertently chaining all the manners together and really making a mess of things. For example, when he was about 4, I think, we would sneeze or pretend to sneeze, and we would teach him to say, God bless you. And then we would say, thank you. And then we would try to teach you're welcome all at the same time. This was a critical mistake. So what happened then is after a few of our little trials at 2, Lucas would say, God bless you, thank you, you're welcome, all together. And because I wasn't a behavior analyst back then, I had no idea how to fix it. And it took me, I don't know how long it took me to fix it, but to this day, Lucas will say thank you after God bless you after someone sneezes. But we do not teach you're welcome, and he doesn't say you're welcome, but he does say God bless you. He says thank you. He says excuse me. He says move please. And today I'm going to talk about the 3 mistakes and also what to do instead so that you can have a child that has good manners. And I remember back, probably when Lucas was a teenager, he needed to get a 2-day EEG to rule out seizures at a medical center. And I had to stay over with him, of course, for the 2 days. And he tolerated it well. And we were able to rule out seizures at that time. And I remember all the nurses there were so impressed with his manners. And it kind of made me laugh because, the messes we made with his manners early on gave me a chuckle. But like I said, we did teach Lucas to have really good manners. And it was several nurses who complimented Lucas and me on his manners, even though he has pretty impaired verbal abilities. He can communicate, but he is not conversational. So let's talk about mistake number one. Mistake number one is, like I did with Lucas, teaching manners too early before your child or clients have hundreds of spontaneous two-word utterances. I used to say 1 to 2 word utterances, but I recently did a podcast where we talked about the mistakes that people make when building language, and some research that I found out about through Dr. Carbone's National Autism Conference lecture shows that really we need to develop 2-word pivotal phrases before we can really hone in on teaching more advanced language such as manners. So we don't want to teach too early. If your child can't request what they need, they can't label hundreds of items, they can't label some actions, they can't request some actions, they can't imitate, they can't match, they can't talk. Teaching please and thank you, which a lot of early intervention professionals recommend, and a lot of parents are eager to teach. If it's taught too early, it may very well backfire. So I just teach a lot about length of utterance, like adding carrier phrases, which I would suggest you avoid. I did a video blog on why I would avoid teaching carrier phrases, and carrier phrases are at the beginning. Usually at the beginning, sometimes at the end, but they're pat rote kind of responses. So once a child can ask for cookie, a lot of times people recommend teaching I want, or once they can label sky or cup, somebody might, well-meaning, they're trying to expand length of utterance, but they might teach that's a, or I see a. And those pat phrases really get in the way when we're trying to teach more flexible responding. So the length of utterance is a big deal. I like to go with, instead of word length, I like to go with syllable length. And so adding a please or thank you, like I want cookie, please. That's a lot of syllables. I want cookie, please. That's 5 syllables. If you don't have spontaneity with 1 to 2 syllable words, teaching rote responses like that is probably going to not be a good idea. The other thing that we look at when we look at length of utterance is articulation. So if the cookie sounds like oogie or ooey, adding more words and more syllables really is just going to get in the way. And we have to really think about please and like what does that do for the child? Pretty much nothing. It reminds me of a little boy I saw years ago, and he had some words, and I was trying to assess him, and he was reaching for this bag of chips, and he was saying chip or I want chip. And I would give him a chip, or I would break off half a chip and give it to him. But he was having problem behaviors. He was tantruming. And I said to his mom, like, why is he tantruming? And she said, because he wants the whole bag. He wants a whole chip. And so adding, I think he was even saying please. So he was saying, I want chip, please. And I was giving him a chip, but he wanted the whole bag. So he didn't have enough language. So that I want and please really was not helpful. Like whole chip, which is a pretty intense concept. So that's probably too early to teach, but we need to teach actions, adjectives, and nouns and get kids flexibly responding. Avoid putting please on the end of things. It's just going to add more length of utterance, more articulation problems potentially, and it could shape up weird language if we're not careful. Okay, so what we want to do instead of starting manners too early is we want to focus on the child's wants and needs. The demand or requesting should be at the center of each child's programming. It should be at the center of what if I were learning a foreign language, I would be wanting to know, like say I was going to Japan tomorrow and I know 0 Japanese. So what kind of words am I going to look up in the dictionary or have an app on my phone? I'm going to look for words like eat, taxi, drink, hungry, those are all requests to meet my needs. I'm not going to look up in the dictionary how to say things in a complete sentence because that's obviously very complicated. So we want to really focus on 1-word utterances, 1 to 2 syllables. And then as we expand to 2-word utterances, we want to slowly expand those syllables and the complexity. And we want to forget about manners early on. Okay. So mistake number 2 is chaining manners together. That's the example I used with Lucas. God bless you. Thank you. You're welcome. Another big one, big manners, big part of manner. An example of a manner that's chained together is I'm sorry. And I did do a video blog on I'm sorry, so you may want to check that out. Anything I'm mentioning here that you quote unquote may want to check out, you can find in the show notes at marybarbera.com/98. I know you may be exercising or driving in a car or doing other things, but you can always get to the show notes. Even if you want to search Mary Autism and Manners, you'll find my show notes and you'll find all the things that I'm recommending. So I'm sorry is chained together with problem behaviors a fair amount. So child has problem behaviors and say they have language and they have the ability to echo you. I did a podcast on echoic control. So the child hits his brother and mom comes in and brother's crying and the child with autism is sitting there and mom says, that's not nice. Say, I'm sorry. The child says, I'm sorry. And it gets chained together. So next time Johnny hits his brother, he might be hitting him saying, I'm sorry. I'm sorry doesn't cancel the fact that now we have a hitting problem. We have aggression. And aggression's serious. And especially if it's not your brother in your family or if the child is bigger, he can hurt his brother. If he's in a preschool and he bites a classmate, that's very common for biting to get children thrown out of daycare. I did a podcast a video blog on getting kicked out or held back in daycare or preschool. And biting, I always say, is like a behavior that will get you thrown out of places. Because it's dangerous. If a child bites and they end up having something like hepatitis or AIDS or anything, they could transmit that. The bite could also get infected, whether they bite a child or an adult. And so biting is something that's really dangerous. So if you're chaining in, I'm sorry for biting, it's not solving the problem. We need to figure out why the child is biting. And we need to spend 95% of our time preventing problem behavior, not reacting to it. You may say, well, that's part of his consequence. He has to say, I'm sorry, then he has to sit in timeout, then this and that. But I'm saying as a behavior analyst, as a nurse, as a mom, chaining together anything, saying I'm sorry or having any kind of consequence like timeout, if biting is occurring, something is not right. We need to go back to the drawing board. Make sure you have an assessment, like my one-page assessment, a plan. You need to be preventing problem behaviors. And I know it's a ton of work, but chaining I'm sorry in makes things confusing, especially if a child doesn't understand what I'm sorry is, doesn't understand language, can't request, can't label, can't imitate, can't match. All of those skills, they may sound like they have nothing to do with problem behavior and nothing to do with manners, but we need to look at the whole child and make sure that the child is as safe as possible, which if they're having problem behaviors, they're not being safe. They need to be as independent as possible and as happy as possible. And prevention is key. So teaching I'm sorry is difficult and really needs to be on the back burner until your child has developed language. If you follow the VB map, which my courses go over how to use the VB map pretty extensively, unless your child is in level 3 or beyond the VB map areas, has a language ability of at least a high 3-year-old or 4-year-old or beyond, they are not going to be able to understand I'm sorry. And that's just going to mess with the language and chain things together like I chained thank you, God bless you, thank you, you're welcome. Okay, so the first mistake to avoid is teaching manners too early. And the number 2 mistake that I see that I've made in the past is chaining manners with other things, chaining manners with other language before the child's ready, chaining them with problem behavior. And the third big mistake that I see is once the child is ready to learn manners, not teaching it systematically. So when the child is ready, and I learned actually some of this pretty early on when Lucas was 4 or 5. He didn't have a lot of language, but I was able to teach him excuse me and thank you based on the advice I saw in a workshop presented by Dr. Bridget Taylor. Bridget Taylor was interviewed in podcast number 56. It's a great interview. You may want to go back to that. We didn't touch on any manners, I don't think, but I did see her, and she gave some good examples of how to teach manners. So I do want to give credit to Dr. Bridget Taylor for teaching me early on, 2 decades ago, some of the early work with manners. Okay, so when a child is ready, when they have some flexible 2-word responses and they have major problem behavior near 0, they have some language, and it might be time to teach excuse me and thank you. So I'll teach thank you first. So thank you. The best way I have found, based on some of the examples that I saw early on, is to have the child request what they want. So say it's a drink, right? And as you're giving the drink to the child and he's putting his hand on the drink, instead of letting it go, kind of give a tug and say, thank you. The child says, thank you. Now, this is for a child that has echoic control, who has the ability to echo what you're saying. So I hand it to him. He requests drink. I hand it to him, but I don't release my hand. His hand is there, and I prompt, thank you. And in this case with Lucas, when he was little, he said, thank you, and then I would give it to him. Then I would do another trial, maybe right then, maybe an hour later, maybe the next day. I would again he'd request drink or a cookie or something that you can hold on to and give a little tug. You're not in a tug of war with the item. You're just gently giving a little tug back to prompt the thank you. So in this case, say it was just a minute later, he asked for a drink again. I handed it to him. I gave him a little tug. Now this time, instead of giving a full prompt of thank you, I might give a partial prompt and just say th, like TH sound. And in that case, Lucas did take that prompt. I said, he said thank you. And then I might have even, before I gave him that, done a transfer trial. And I've done a lot of work with Dr. Rick Cabina on transfer trials. I have a podcast episode about it. So I might right away not even give him a drink, do it again. He says drink, I pull it back, and he says thank you, even independently, and then he get it. For Lucas and kids like that, even without a ton of language, who have echoic control, you can teach thank you like this. I would avoid verbal prompting, like give it to him and then say thank you, or what do you say? That's the way most people teach thank you. And it gets kids really prompt dependent. So I like to give a little tug on the item and see if you can reduce your prompts and teach the child to say thank you. So that is how I routinely teach thank you. The other early manners that I teach is excuse me. So when I saw Bridget Taylor 2 decades ago, and I have not a great memory, so if I can remember a video she showed 2 decades ago, it was powerful, right? So it was an older child. So Lucas was only like 4 years old when I saw Bridget Taylor for the first time. It was an older child that came behind Bridget or somebody she was working with, this older teenager. This person standing in front of the teenager was blocking access to cookies or something that the teenager wanted. So they were blocking it. The teenager came kind of close to them, behind them. And then there was a third person standing there, like a therapist or a mom, and she prompted, excuse me. You can even prompt the teenager or the young child tapping on the shoulder and saying, excuse me. And then the therapist or the adult would move out of the way and the child would get access to the reinforcement. So when I saw this, I thought, excuse me seems like a pretty reasonable thing to teach Lucas, even though he was 4, he didn't have a ton of language, but we did have, I probably didn't even know what it was called, but he would echo us. So I remember he was doing ABA in the basement, day in and day out for 6 to 8 hours a day. I mean, it was very rigorous. And I remember one of his reinforcers was that he really loved this CD playing, the music, nursery rhymes. And we would play bits of it and stuff. But only with this one song, Mary Had a Little Lamb, Lucas, who was 4, would hop up out of his seat and he would run around the room. Something in that song made Lucas run around the room. So what we did after I went to that lecture, and I thought, okay, how could we prompt him in a fun way? Like, especially early on when he's maybe not ready to teach manners. How could we see if this could work? So what we did was Lucas, we played Mary Had a Little Lamb. He would hop up and he would start running. And I would gently put my arm out to block him and say, excuse me. And he would echo, excuse me. And I would pull up my arm right away and he would keep running around. And then even during the song, I may have gotten 5 trials in. Stop him. He would say, excuse me. I would remove. And I swear within 1 or 2 Mary Had a Little Lambs, Lucas said, excuse me. And best of all, then I remember I was in my other house. I remember vividly sitting on a little step and he wanted to get through. I wasn't doing any trials. I wasn't, doing anything with him. He wanted to get through and he said, excuse me. And I was like, whoa, jackpot. Of course, I hopped on up and let him run through. But it was just teaching him, excuse me, with the Mary Had a Little Lamb. So those are how I teach early manners. I don't teach God bless you, because what's in it for the child? There's something in it to teach thank you because I'm tugging at the item gently. And there's something in excuse me that are built-in built-in reinforcement. And so I would start with those 2 and then go from there. So in summary, don't teach manners too soon. Wait for a fair amount of language to come in. If you don't have a code control, you may want to check out that podcast or video blogs. Don't change please and carrier phrases to requests, and definitely don't chain I'm sorry to problem behaviors. And when it's time to teach manners, teach them systematically. I would start with excuse me and thank you, which tend to be the easiest to teach. And I hope you enjoyed this short podcast. I think it's important. I think it's important that we teach our kids to be as polite as possible. And you can teach it in a fun way like I did and really see improvements pretty quickly if the child is ready. So if you like this episode, I would love it if you hop on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening, give me a great review and rating. If you didn't like it, or if there's something that is causing you not to give a 5-star review, email us at info@marybarbera.com. We're open to constructive feedback. It's just we need to get the word out that I do have techniques to help parents and professionals help kids with autism or signs of autism do better, talk more, tantrum less, and help them with eating, sleeping, potty, desensitization to the doctors, dentists. Those are all really big concepts. And I'm covering them here in my podcast. I need you to come out and help me in this action to get the word out that there is a better way and that we want our kids and ourselves to live happier lives, be more independent, and get to their fullest potential, and have all of us get to our fullest potential too. That's my goal. So have a great day, and I hope you enjoyed this podcast.